They say there's a moment in every man's life where the rug gets pulled out from under him, and all he can do is watch himself tumble in slow motion. Mine happened at a 4th of July barbecue, of all places. And let me tell you, nothing ruins a patriotic evening faster than realizing the biggest fireworks aren't in the sky. It was supposed to be a relaxing day, the kind where you forget your troubles over charred burgers and cheap beer. Claire, my wife, had planned our attendance weeks in advance, like she always did with neighborhood events. She loved these things, basking in the glow of suburban normalcy while chatting with anyone willing to listen. I wasn't as enthusiastic. If I'm being honest, I'd rather spend my holiday in the comfort of my backyard with a cold one and some peace and quiet. But Claire insisted. She had a knack for convincing me to step out of my comfort zone, and this time was no different. "Everyone's going to be there, Alex," she had said. "You can't keep skipping out." So I obliged, throwing on a casual shirt and jeans, and preparing myself for an afternoon of mindless small talk. The barbecue was hosted by the Ryans, a picture-perfect couple with a penchant for over-the-top gatherings. Their backyard was a sea of red, white, and blue decorations, complete with lawn games, a bouncy castle for the kids, and a meticulously arranged buffet. It was the kind of event that looked great in photos, but felt exhausting in person. I spent the first hour doing what I do best at these things, blending into the background. I chatted with a co-worker of Claire's I vaguely remembered meeting once before and listened to one of the neighbors talk about his new smoker. But my mind wasn't really there. Claire, meanwhile, was in her element. She had a way of making everyone feel like the most important person in the room, flitting between conversations with her signature laugh, punctuating every interaction. She looked radiant, her sundress swaying as she moved from group to group, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride. She was the kind of person who could light up a room effortlessly. And then I saw it, or rather, I felt it, a flicker of something just out of place. It wasn't a big moment, more of a passing glance. Claire was talking to a man I didn't recognize, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that seemed to spill over into his every gesture. Their conversation looked casual, but something about the way she leaned in, her hand brushing his arm briefly, made my stomach tighten. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe it was just her usual charisma at play. She was like this with everyone, wasn't she? Always warm, always friendly. Still, I found myself watching them longer than I meant to, trying to piece together something invisible but undeniable. It didn't help that the man seemed oddly familiar, though I couldn't place him. I shook off the unease and tried to focus on my plate of food, convincing myself that I was reading into things too much. As the day wore on, I kept catching glimpses of Claire and this man, always in passing, never long enough to raise outright suspicion, but enough to leave a bitter taste in my mouth. They weren't doing anything overtly inappropriate, but the air around them felt charged in a way I couldn't ignore. I stayed quiet. I didn't want to jump to conclusions or make a scene over what could be nothing. After all, Claire had never given me a reason not to trust her. But there was something gnawing at the edge of my thoughts, a feeling I couldn't shake. The party carried on, the hum of conversation and laughter filling the warm evening air. Fireworks were planned for later, but I was already thinking about how to excuse myself early. The crowd, the noise, the growing tension in my chest, it was all too much. Little did I know, the events of that day would unravel everything I thought I knew about my life, one slow, agonizing thread at a time. The man Claire was talking to didn't just vanish from my thoughts after that barbecue. No, his image burned itself into my brain, like the afterglow of a firework that just wouldn't fade. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than just a random guest at the party. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I didn't know. At first, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I mean, who was I to question Claire's intentions? She was always charming, always drawing people into her orbit. But then there were the little details, subtle things I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't been paying attention. For one, Claire didn't introduce me to him. She was usually great about that, making sure I met everyone at social gatherings so I wouldn't feel out of place. But this time, nothing. She kept their interactions separate, like I was watching two people in a play where I wasn't cast as a character. Then there was the way she avoided me for the rest of the evening. Every time I tried to catch her eye, She seemed conveniently occupied, helping set up the dessert table, chatting with neighbors, or laughing just a little too loudly at someone's joke. It wasn't her usual behavior, and it set my nerves on edge. The next morning, the curiosity became unbearable. I wasn't proud of it, but I decided to dig around. Claire had always been an open book. No locked phones, no secret passwords, so it didn't feel like crossing a line when I checked her phone while she was in the shower. That's when I found the first crack in the facade. There wasn't anything blatantly incriminating, no texts or photos that screamed affair. But her recent call log had a number I didn't recognize, one she'd called several times over the past week. I copied it down, telling myself it was probably nothing, just a friend or co-worker I hadn't met. But the gnawing in my gut told me otherwise. I ran the number through a reverse phone lookup app. What I found stopped me cold. The number was registered to a man named Daniel Carlson, a name I'd never heard before, but the address listed was just 2 blocks away from ours. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some stranger Claire had met at the barbecue. Daniel was a neighbor, someone close enough to watch our lives unfold, without me ever realizing he was there. I felt like an idiot. How had I missed this? The worst part was that his face had started to feel familiar, like I'd seen him before in fleeting moments, walking his dog, jogging past our house, even at the grocery store. He'd been there all along, hiding in plain sight. I didn't confront Claire right away. I needed more than a hunch before I could accuse her of something so serious. So, I did what any man in my position would do. I started paying attention. I noticed things I'd never cared about before. Like how Claire suddenly had an excuse to leave the house at odd hours. A yoga class here, a last-minute errand there. Or how she'd come home flushed and breathless, like she'd been running, even when it didn't make sense. And then, there were the clothes. I found a receipt in her purse for a dress I'd never seen her wear. One she claimed was just something fun for summer. But when I checked her closet, it wasn't there. Piece by piece, the puzzle started coming together, and the picture it painted wasn't pretty. I could feel the walls closing in, my trust unraveling with every new discovery. I wasn't sure how much more I could take, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let this go without a fight. If Claire thought she could hide her secrets from me, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. I've always been the guy who notices the little things, patterns, oddities, pieces of a puzzle most people overlook. Maybe that's why I chose finance as a career. Numbers don't lie. People do. And Claire? She was starting to look like a walking red flag, hidden under the guise of her usual charm. But I didn't need to follow her around like some amateur detective. No, that wasn't my style. I wanted something concrete, something that would stick in her throat when the truth finally came out. So I went for the one thing people always underestimate in these situations: data. You see, Claire had a smartwatch she was practically glued to. It tracked her steps, her heart rate, her workouts, everything. She'd even synced it with our shared fitness app, something we used during one of those fleeting New Year's resolutions to get fit together. She probably didn't think twice about it after January, but I'd never turned off the notifications. That's how I first noticed it. Her activity levels had been, well, interesting. Normally, she'd average about 5,000 steps a day, but recently, there were sudden spikes. Like the day of the barbecue, where she logged over 15,000 steps without a single explanation. It didn't make sense. She wasn't training for a marathon, and it wasn't like she'd started hiking. So, I dug deeper. The app also logged workout sessions, complete with timestamps and GPS data. That's when I found something that made my stomach churn. While I was at work, Claire had been going on runs to a park 2 towns over. One I knew had no running trails but plenty of secluded picnic areas. The same park popped up 3 times in the last 2 weeks, and the GPS path showed she wasn't exactly running. She'd stopped for extended periods in one spot before heading back. I couldn't ignore the coincidence anymore. Claire's smartwatch had inadvertently become my accomplice, feeding me breadcrumbs she probably didn't even know she'd left behind. I needed more, though. This wasn't enough to confront her with, not yet. So I took things a step further. I hacked into her fitness app account. It wasn't hard. She used the same password for everything. What I found there almost made me laugh out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it was so ridiculously careless. She had a shared activity with someone else. Another user named DC. The app showed their synced runs and workouts, all neatly time-stamped and perfectly aligned with her trips to the park. DC wasn't just anyone. It was Daniel Carlson. I couldn't make this up if I tried. The man wasn't even smart enough to turn off public sharing. Every step they took together was logged for the world, or at least for me, to see. At this point, I didn't even feel anger. Not yet anyway. What I felt was a strange sense of validation. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place, and each one made the picture clearer. But I wasn't done. I decided to see how far their carelessness went. I started looking through her email. Again, nothing groundbreaking, just a lot of boring newsletters and a few work memos. But one thread caught my eye, a receipt for a boutique hotel 2 hours away. She'd stayed there for work last month, except I knew her job didn't require overnight travel. I clicked on the receipt, scanning for details, and there it was, the guest name listed for her room. Not Claire. It was booked under Daniel Carlson. This wasn't just a casual fling. This was premeditated, coordinated, and deeply personal. And the worst part? She wasn't even trying to hide it. She thought I'd never notice. But now I knew. I had everything I needed, the GPS logs, the shared workouts, the hotel receipt. And soon, she'd know too. Because if Claire wanted to run around behind my back, I was going to show her just how far I could go to catch her. There's a unique kind of rage that comes with betrayal. It's not the immediate, hot anger of someone cutting you off in traffic. No, this is colder, sharper, and it stays with you. It's the kind of anger that sits heavy in your chest, whispering that you need to do something, anything, to make it right. After uncovering the extent of Claire's affair, I couldn't just sit with the knowledge. I needed her to feel the weight of what she'd done, to understand that the life we'd built together wasn't something she could discard without consequences. But how do you confront someone who's already convinced they've outsmarted you? That's when the idea came to me. If Claire thought she could keep her secrets hidden in plain sight, I'd bring them into the spotlight, literally. It started with the hotel receipt. I called the boutique hotel, pretending to be Daniel Carlson. Using the reservation details I'd found in her email, I sweet-talked the front desk into sending me a copy of their full, itemized bill. Sure enough, it was all there. 2 meals charged to the room, champagne service, and a note for early check-in requested for special occasion. Next, I turned to the fitness app. I screenshotted every GPS log of her secret meetups with Daniel, highlighting the timestamps that aligned with her yoga classes and errands. I even pulled up her shared workouts with him, complete with their smug little step counts and heart rate spikes. But the piece de resistance came when I decided to revisit the park where they'd had their runs. I went at the same time their GPS logs indicated they'd been there. Sure enough, in one of the picnic areas, I found a discarded receipt for a coffee shop with both their names printed on the order. It was like the universe wanted me to catch them, leaving little breadcrumbs everywhere I looked. Armed with this mountain of evidence, I hatched my plan. Our neighborhood was hosting another event, a Labor Day block party, complete with food trucks, live music, and a massive outdoor movie screen for showing family-friendly films. It was the kind of event Claire loved, the kind where she'd be in her element, chatting with everyone and basking in the attention. That night, as everyone gathered on their lawn chairs and picnic blankets to watch a light-hearted rom-com under the stars, I approached the man running the projector. He was a friend, someone I knew from our HOA meetings, and he owed me a favor. I handed him a USB drive, loaded with the evidence I collected. "Play this instead," I said. When the screen lit up, it wasn't the opening credits of the movie the neighbors were expecting. Instead, it was Claire's fitness app logs, displayed in vivid detail for everyone to see. The timestamps, the GPS paths to Daniel's house, the shared activity sessions. It was all there, flashing across the screen like some damning PowerPoint presentation. The murmurs started immediately. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing between the screen and Claire, who was frozen in shock. But I wasn't done. Next came the hotel receipt, projected in bold letters for the entire neighborhood to read. Gasps erupted as the details scrolled by. The champagne, the special occasion, the room booked under Daniel's name. Claire's face turned ghostly pale. She looked at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. But no words came. Finally, I played a short video montage I created, featuring photos of her and Daniel together from the fitness app and their coffee shop receipt. It ended with a single, damning sentence. For someone who always kept me on my toes, Claire, you sure were sloppy. The party fell silent, save for the whispers and the occasional awkward cough. Claire bolted, disappearing into the darkness without a word. I stayed behind, sipping my drink as neighbors avoided making eye contact with me. The whispers would start soon, the rumors spreading like wildfire. But I didn't care. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. The truth was out, and Claire could no longer hide behind her lies. There's a raw, unfiltered satisfaction that comes with pulling the rug out from under someone who thought they had you fooled. Watching Claire's face drain of color, her polished composure shatter like glass in front of the entire neighborhood. It was almost poetic. But the true reckoning was just beginning. The morning after the block party, I woke to find Claire gone. No note, no text, just an eerie silence where her presence used to linger. I wasn't surprised. Running away had always been her go-to move when faced with consequences. But this time, there was nowhere for her to hide. The fallout hit immediately. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages from neighbors. Some expressed shock, others feigned sympathy, but most were just fishing for gossip. The highlight came when Linda from across the street sent me a screenshot of Claire's Facebook profile, where her relationship status had quietly changed from married to nothing at all. By noon, it became clear that Claire wasn't just lying low, she was trying to save face. I got a call from her sister, Emily, who wasted no time jumping to Claire's defense. She's devastated, Alex, Emily said, her voice sharp with accusation. How could you humiliate her like that? I let her rant, only responding when she finally paused for breath. Did she tell you why I did it? I asked, my tone calm but deliberate. There was silence on the other end. She didn't need to answer. Of course Claire hadn't told her. In Claire's version of the story, she was probably the victim, somehow betrayed by the man who'd just spent weeks uncovering her deceit. The best part? The neighborhood wasn't buying her act. Word spread like wildfire. People who once adored Claire, the same ones who flocked to her at every party, hung on her every word, started pulling away. I'd catch glimpses of them in their yards, whispering behind hedges, their faces a mixture of disbelief and quiet judgment. Then came Daniel. I didn't expect him to show his face, but apparently, stupidity knows no bounds. 3 days after the block party, I was working in the garage when I heard tires screeching outside. I stepped out to see Daniel storming up my driveway, his face red with anger. You had no right, he spat, his voice trembling. I crossed my arms, leaning casually against the garage door. No right to what? Expose the truth. This wasn't your story to tell, he barked, his hands clenching in a fist at his sides. I laughed, a low, bitter sound that seemed to catch him off guard. It became my story the second you started sneaking around with my wife, Daniel. Or did you think you could just keep playing the doting neighbor while screwing her behind my back? He didn't have an answer for that. Instead, he muttered something about lawyers and defamation before storming back to his car. I didn't stop him. Let him try. I had more than enough evidence to back up everything I'd shared, and he knew it. Claire finally came home that evening, though not in the way I expected. She didn't walk through the front door or call ahead to talk. No, she sent a moving truck. I watched from the living room window as 2 men loaded her things onto the truck, each box a reminder of the life we'd built together. She didn't even come inside to face me, just stood on the curb, arms crossed, avoiding my gaze. But I wasn't about to let her off that easily. As the movers worked, I stepped outside and approached her, my footsteps deliberate on the pavement. Running away again? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. She flinched but didn't look at me. I'm just taking what's mine, she said, her tone cold. I gestured toward the truck. Yours? Everything in there was bought with my money, Claire. But go ahead, take it. You've already taken enough. Her face twisted into something between anger and guilt, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with a bitter taste in my mouth. As the truck pulled away, I realized something. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the end of the person I'd thought Claire was. The woman I'd loved, trusted, and built a life with had been a lie, a carefully constructed mask that had finally cracked. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel defeated. I felt free. Freedom has a strange taste. It's bitter at first, sharp like the sting of betrayal, but then it settles, leaving behind something surprisingly sweet. That's how I felt the day Claire left for good. Empty at first, but slowly filling with something else, clarity. Her departure wasn't the end of the chaos, though. The aftermath played out like a messy courtroom drama, except the jury was made up of our neighbors and mutual acquaintances, all eager to pick sides. To my surprise, most of them rallied behind me. Claire had always been the golden girl of the neighborhood, but people love a good scandal. And when the truth came out, it turned out she had fewer allies than she thought. Whispers spread about her special yoga classes and secret outings with Daniel. The sympathy she might have earned was drowned out by the sheer audacity of her lies. But the real vindication came a week later. I'd been tidying up the house, trying to make sense of the emptiness she left behind, when a certified letter arrived. It was from Claire's lawyer, demanding a settlement for her share of our assets. Apparently, she decided she was entitled to more than just the furniture she'd already taken. I laughed out loud as I read the letter. The nerve of her, was almost impressive. But instead of responding through legal channels, I took a different approach. The next day, I went to the boutique hotel where she and Daniel had enjoyed their little getaway. I requested a copy of their receipt, not for legal reasons, but because I had a plan. You see, that hotel catered to a high-end clientele, and they took privacy very seriously. A few strategic emails later, I had their names flagged in the system as undesirable guests. I wasn't done. Using her fitness app logs, I traced their routes to a few other locations they frequented: a restaurant, a park, a coffee shop. Each place became a target for my quiet revenge. A well-placed word to a manager here, a forwarded receipt there. It was amazing how easily people turned cold once they realized someone was using their establishment as a rendezvous spot for an affair. The cherry on top came when I mailed Daniel's wife. Yes, he had a wife. A manila envelope containing every piece of evidence I collected. Hotel receipts, fitness app screenshots, even a timeline of their meetups. I didn't include a note. I figured the contents spoke for themselves. A few days later, I saw a moving truck outside Daniel's house. His wife had taken the kids and left, the front yard littered with discarded furniture and hastily packed boxes. Daniel himself was nowhere to be seen, though I liked to imagine he was inside, wallowing in the ruins of his double life. As for Claire, I heard through the grapevine that she moved in with her sister. Emily sent me a scathing email about how I'd ruined Claire's reputation, to which I replied with a single sentence: she did that on her own. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild. The house felt strange without her, but it also felt lighter, as if the walls themselves were glad to be rid of her deceit. I redecorated, tossing out anything that reminded me of her and replacing it with things that felt like me. I started going out more, reconnecting with old friends, finding pieces of myself I'd forgotten during my years of trying to be the perfect husband. I even took a trip to a place we'd always talked about visiting, but never did because Claire had better ideas. And on the 4th of July the next year, as fireworks lit up the night sky, I stood in my backyard with a cold drink in hand, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Betrayal might knock you down, but it doesn't have to break you. Sometimes, it's the fire that forges you into something stronger. As for Claire and Daniel, they're just footnotes in my story now. And honestly, that's all they'll ever be.